Ken, you talked about collaborating with designers and scientists in your approach. How does it work collaborating also with policymakers and landowners?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one of the big components is to recognize relatively early on that while any designer is working on a site, a specific location, it's set within the larger context of the city in this case. And really recognizing and understanding the priorities of the city, but also the needs of the city. And so one of the lessons learned was really about education and marked, the public to be educated. But I really do think it's educating policymakers as well. And how do we engage in improving the ecological health of urban environments is often a bit of a struggle for policymakers to understand that in some ways you need to let go of a little bit of control and let the environment let the environment, and in this case beaver, take some of the initiative for improving that. With landowners, it can be a little bit more challenging. A lot of landowners still view, for example, in this case, beaver as nuisance species, things that get in the way of how they manage their land. But really trying to, again, work with them and educate them on the benefits that beaver provide for not only their land, but the overall system that they live on.
That's great. Thank you. I also noticed that this case study was really in a prime location. What happens when you're working with a location that's further upstream and might have downstream consequences?
Yeah, the Magnuson Park case study was really a prime location because of its direct outlet into Lake Washington right at the end of the project. We do work on projects that are further upstream in different areas. And I think when working within any stream environment, you really need to take a watershed or a full system perspective to understand how design impacts in one particular location might have these downstream impacts to other landholders or public infrastructure and those other components. And so when we're working farther up in systems, a big part of our early work is mapping and understanding the stream system and the infrastructure and the and kind of the land ownership makeup for several hundred yards, if not up to half a mile below the project, and really recognizing if we are altering hydrology or if we are shifting flow or if the beaver dam does break, what are going to be some of those downstream impacts. And so part of that again goes back to educating downstream landowners, but also evaluating infrastructure to make sure that it could accommodate that. So for example, culverts underneath roads or bridges. How can we make sure that those would be protected, but also how do we establish management plans in case they do need to be managed due to an emergency circumstance?
Thank you so much, Ken. I have one last question for you. I'd like to know if there's other species that you're working with that contribute to ecological health in urban environments and what those species might be.
Yeah, I would say, well, here within the Pacific Northwest, we often work within aquatic systems, and so work with prioritizing different species, and that's a real focus of our work. Or what are the priority species for management? And those species might be species that are endangered or threatened. Their populations might be endangered or threatened locally, or they might be species like the beaver that are ecosystem engineers. When they populate a particular area, they change the environment that improves the habitat for others. And so a lot of the work that I do is an in-stream work for fish populations, improving fish habitat. But we also look into work for improving bird habitat quite a bit. And within urban environments, a lot of it is a collaboration between urban forestry practices, and the needs of priority bird species, and how do we begin to manage for that? So a given project might be, for example, bald eagles need tall trees on which they can in which they can roost, and so during different land development practices, it's about maintaining certain areas of forest that have mature trees to support the bald eagle. Um, that might be one aspect or one approach to it. We also do a lot of work for designing for amphibians because they're a clear indicator of water quality. And so, how do we design for amphibians and support their life cycles while also having them serve to us as an indicator of water quality, whether they continue to populate an area or move on. So those would just be some examples in different ways and different approaches that we're engaging with different species. But I think as a designer, the key element is, especially as a landscape architect, really thinking about the landscape and the systems and the processes that support that landscape. Um, and how, as a designer, can you engage in different practices to kind of help to support ecological health, and these different species might help to give you a lens to direct you in particular directions.
Thank you so much, Ken. Thanks for visiting with us, and we really appreciate you and your time and your contribution. Thank you.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you.